Alright, what's up YouTube? Welcome back to the Cutlass Board Games channel. Today I am joined with Billy Blue, the artist that did all the character art for Murders at Tealwoods Manor. My latest major project, the reverse murder mystery game. Do you want to give us a quick summary of who you are and how you got here, I guess?
I'm the artist on the game. Of course, I did all the character art. Um, I do a lot of work in the RPG field, so you may have seen a few of things I've done there. This was a nice challenge for me, working on a game and a mobile game, and the style that we chose to work in was really fun. So it was a fun project, and I really liked the way the characters turned out.
Yeah, I do too, actually. And it's funny that you bring that up because a lot I tend to just pitch it as just the board game, right? Because that was my
Mhm.
priority in creating art. But the other thing is that we doubled up, right? We created a video game using all the art assets as well, which meant that there was the additional problem if we had to make everything work in both the big wallpaper size that I have the video game set to, and then the specific small art assets that's going to be on the
Yeah,
cards and stuff for the board game, which was
yeah,
its own problem.
yeah.
um, but that's a good point. While we are talking about the game's art brief itself, the original kind of concept that we had and what I started with the original prototype was this kind of 1600s British nobility giant banquet. The original title for the game was Banquet at Tealwoods Manor. Um, and then that was because I was using historical art, and I'll put some up on the screen for us here. And it had a few problems with it, obviously, that I couldn't take to a final product. And that was why I wanted to bring in an artist like Billy here to be able to go through and create some really interesting characters that really do communicate the theme of the game together. The original 1600 stuff didn't really fit with exactly the vibe I was going for the murder mystery thing, because I wanted to lean more towards like an Agatha Christie type kind of style, and maybe that Art Deco kind of a thing. And that's the direction that we did end up moving in, and I do really like how that turned out. But it is also heavily inspired by Cluedo, and you can kind of see that in the characters where we wanted to individually introduce a unique color that is like the overall color identity for that character, rather than having an overarching palette for everything. Which I think had its own challenges in itself, because I remember I sent you the briefs, and it's like all of the briefs is like three characters have details, and like seven of them is just the color, and you're like, can you give me something more than this?
Yeah, yeah.
Let's get started with Barrow Townsend. This is one that I like the story notes for, and I kind of gave you a really generic vibe from memory, where it was this kind of like super pasty white guy, but as the story goes, he's supposed to be like Satan, basically. In the game, he literally asks you to bet on which guests are going to die before you even know that there's a murder. And I really wanted to communicate that through whilst yes, the character's color identity is black, but also this red motif through I remember asking, I wanted to have like a lot of jewelry on the character, a lot of red jewelry, and that's kind of how we came to the base thing. Do you want to kind of walk us through how you got from that really vague description to what we have here on screen?
Yeah, yeah. That's an interesting one because I really like the way he turned out. First of all, I think he just ended up in a really good spot. Um, when you get a character brief that is really vague, two things can happen. Either it's really good because it's kind of like a hey, go wild and whatever you want to do, or it usually means, in this case, it was a little bit of both. It usually means I'm not quite sure what I want you to make for me yet, Mr.
Yeah.
Artist. So help me figure it out. You know, and that one is a little bit more of a process to go through. But like I said, this character ended up in a really good spot. I remember the original brief being something along the lines of he's sort of a death-like character, or a Grim Reaper-like character, but he
Yeah.
shouldn't look like the Grim Reaper, so no hood and no shadowy face and all that. He should just have a feeling like that, almost like as if a person could embody the vibe of death,
Mm.
without, and a lot of this is my own headcanon, but without seeming mystical so much as just spooky.
Yeah.
Um, so that was the way I approached this character, and I think that the jewelry is actually a really good point because if you if you take a pasty guy and dress him all in black, you're automatically going to get the vibes of spooky, evil, creepy, all that kind of stuff. Okay, that part's easy. But how do you make him seem like an actual person?
Mm.
Meaning
And how does
he
he fit
has
into that universe of all these rich people at a
exactly,
party? Yeah.
exactly. So the jewelry, and not just jewelry, I think he had a rose print tie,
Hmm.
I believe, and just a few notes of like red on his tie and his cufflinks and things like that. And the reason why I think that helped the character come together is because um, jewelry is a very human thing.
Mm.
And so it automatically made you feel like, okay, this is a flesh and blood person, but he still has the aura of menace that you would expect from the embodiment of death,
Yeah. He's very
And
imposing.
yes, and it's because I see, and I think that the grounding him with those couple of small human touches somehow makes him seem more creepy
Mm.
because he seems more real. He seems like, okay, he's not a wispy whatever of the
Yeah.
imagination. He's a guy standing in front of me, adjusting his cufflinks, which makes him seem like me. But man, I really don't want to interact with this person because he gives me a bad vibe. And
Yeah.
ultimately, that was kind of the brief I had in my head. Like, make him seem believable, but also kind of suspicious and troubling.
Yeah.
And I think that's where he ended up. So I like that one a lot.
It does have that cool feeling of, imagine a screenwriter writes this ridiculous, hugely complicated, fantastical character, but then the
Mhm.
casting director goes, "Well, I have to put an idiot in these shoes." Right? It kind of has that nice overlap where it's like, okay, here's this ridiculous concept we're trying to embody, but then the human element of the actual person playing that character is really communicated in this piece of art, where you can actually
Yeah,
see Barry Townsend, you can see the
yeah,
things that he attaches to that is his personality, and you see a lot of that
yeah,
in how he interacts with the other guests at the party, where he is very interested in jewelry, and that is kind of how he's come to be part of this group in particular.
yeah. And um, you have to sum all that up with one image,
One
and
image.
one image only through the whole game.
Yeah.
And it's like that's a challenge, right? That's a
Yeah.
challenge. But it's going through this thoughtful process and finding these kind of hooks to hang your hat on that makes those one images actually work.
Mm.
Because you're asking a piece of artwork to do a lot of heavy lifting, to say communicate all of this with one image, but also an image that won't get stale after looking at it 10 or 20 times throughout the game. And also, it can't hit it too on the head.
Yeah.
In a way, a good image has a story to it in almost like a beginning, middle, end, because the first time you look at it, you get your first impression, and after a while of looking at it, you notice a few more things, and then by the time whether it's a game or a movie or a comic is over, you now have a more completed view of the character. So
Yeah.
you almost have like a lifespan of this image that has to be communicated, in one image. And it's a challenge, but it's a fun challenge, and I think he works pretty well.
I agree. I think he's my favorite character, which is really annoying
I
because there's a lot of others that really do tie for this.
mhm,
Lady Tealwoods was my favorite story character coming into everything, right?
uh-huh.
And then who Yellow ended up being at the end and how I've written that character is also very closely a favorite. But I think that Barrett Townsend, how his identity came together with the art direction, has made it probably the coolest one that we have. And that is
Yeah, he
kind of why I
definitely has
wanted
a
to start
coolness.
there.
Yeah. Is he on the screen right now?
He will be,
Or
yeah.
will he be? Oh,
Yeah, he
okay,
will
cool.
be. Uh,
Yeah, he has a very kind of a suave vibe, but also kind of a menacing vibe. And the
mm,
interesting thing is you're saying that he's one of your favorites. When I get a project like this, where it's basically 12 or so, characters, just one image per character, my goal is kind of to make the viewer and the player have like a 12-way tie for favorite characters,
yeah.
and that's part of the challenge of it is going through that process, like we said with Townsend, where you find different elements of that character that make them unique and interesting, and then revealing them through this image in kind of subtle and progressive ways. And you
Mm,
do that for every single character. And if you can do that successfully for every character, you start to get these kind of story moments, you know, hidden within an image. And that's
Yeah,
just what makes interesting characters, you know, just character design in general.
exactly. While we're on that, let's get on to the next character, Lady Tealwoods. Now, Lady Tealwoods
Mhm.
has had a bit of an evolution because the original game and the art that I used was historical art that is like DMCA is not the right term, but it's free for creators to use, right? And the problem with all these portraits from the 1600s that I used is there's two women. And
Mm.
one of them wasn't fit for the project because I was trying to give across a sense of opulence amongst the banquet guests. And there
Mm.
was one that did work, which is the lady with the umbrella. And I did really like that starting idea where we have all these powerful men, but there is the woman that is the head of the table. She is Lady Tealwoods. She's the one that runs the banquet, is the host of the evening, right?
Mm.
And then when we came into this evolution of creating the character, and we could do whatever we wanted with it, we weren't bound to that original concept. I was like, okay, I want to re-look at how this goes in the lens of that time period and like the tropes of the murder mystery genre, right? So the first thing is
Mm.
we have she's grumpy, she's really hulking, like she's a very
Mm.
muscular woman.
Yeah.
She's a military service woman that carries a saber, right? And some of these things that we came together to build this character was about finding someone that isn't a stereotype in the genre, but does feel like they could exist in there and does feel like they could exist with the other characters. Because they're like the damsel in distress or the dominant woman are things that exist already, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the host to be that person that you're like, okay, definitely this is the person that is not going to take gruff from anyone, right?
Yeah.
Is
Yeah.
going to be grumpy, probably doesn't want people in her home anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
um, but still looks like she could defend herself. And for her to have been the murder victim would be very impressive, and all these kind of things. I really wanted to have an interesting layer to the character, but also people could see her on the blocks and go, "Oh, this is not like your typical
Yeah.
Cluedo game, right?" And I think this
Yeah.
is where
Yeah.
we really did start to deviate from the formula.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. Um, she is a really good example of an interesting thing that happened with this project, and it's that the art direction itself changed, and that doesn't happen too often with a project. And honestly, when that happens with a project, it's usually a big red flag. Um, and the reason why it is usually a red flag is because it means that the idea wasn't thought out thoroughly enough, and that's why you're getting these big changes midstream. The reason why it worked all right with this project, though, is because your art direction that you had before was based mostly on like stock art, clip art, like things that you could get easily and free, you know,
Mm,
or cheap, which is a 1000% valid approach. But since you kind of grabbed what was available, it wasn't really integral
mm,
to the story itself, which means if you did change it, you wouldn't be changing the story or the mechanics or the game at all. So you kind of are fixing an issue, you know, or what could be an issue, you know, right at the beginning, which means, okay, this project can still work. This project will come together well. You did that art direction out of necessity.
mm.
And once that necessity became, you know, not vital right at the beginning of the project, we were able to switch gears, go in a different direction, and have a successful path forward.
Yeah,
So it's an interesting thing, you know, and I've had other projects where they do make a change like that and it doesn't work out very well. And it's always 90% of the time, it's because there is an art director who just hasn't quite figured out what he wants.
mm.
And so, you know, you give him what he wants, and then he realizes upon seeing it, maybe that's not what I wanted. And so let's try
Yeah.
something else, you know.
Because this is the other thing of starting out with that first relationship, the new artist, the new art director, and I go,
Yeah.
this is kind of what I'm gearing up to, but do I give you the most important piece to do first, or do I start off with some stuff that's not super important so I can get a feel for your workflow and your vibe and what the final product will be, and then we go, okay, we've got some good stuff. Now here's the important thing, right? Which I think we kind of ended up doing that, and some of it was us building trust in the process and getting to a point where I can be like, this is kind of my idea, and I know that what you're going to give me from these notes I've given you is going to be good.
Yep. And that's part of the creative relationship that you have to establish. Is you have to learn as the art director, when the artist hands me A, now that I've worked with them a few times, I know what B will look like, and then I know what the final C will look like. So you just have to, as the art director, you have to learn that through interacting a few times, which and similarly, I have to learn that about you, when you ask for A, do you really mean B or do you really mean C, and this is a process that you have to relearn with every new client you get. And this is more design artist behind the scenes talk, as opposed to specifically about this game. But it's important to remember that when you approach a job and you approach a client, you're starting a relationship with that person, and you have to approach it that way so that you can be ready for the kind of twists and turns that relationship will take. And then you start to learn how to read that person and that project and that process. And then once you do that, you are able to better serve that relationship, So it's just like getting to know a person that you live with. You learn their moods, you learn their cues, their schedule, and you are able to kind of better serve those needs. And so it's smart to start off a project in a kind of a let's see what we're doing here environment, and then after one or two or three exchanges back and forth, you start to kind of fall into a pattern, and then the work really picks up and gets better after that.
And I found that because what we did start off with was like a whole bunch of like you said, reference images that kind of gave us an idea for what these things we're trying to do, and a lot of it was just one step away from Cluedo. And once we'd kind of done that, I was like, okay, now like Lady Tealwoods is an important figure. Senator Lytton went from being a nothing to being a something, and we'll talk about him in a second, which I think is also interesting, because then the brief changed again entirely. And then we had some other characters, like Lana Roberts, which is the last one that we'll cover as well, did a whole nother thing as well, where it was we were really trying to nail down specifically the time period to be vague. Where is it Art Deco or Art Deco revival, which is tough in itself, right? So I think we were really ambitious with this product and tried to do a whole bunch of different things here. And it is interesting talking about the artist-art director relationship, because this project has 4 different artists on it. So me as the art director, I've got to handle what you're doing with the character design, and then that has to fit in well. So we had a different artist for the background design. And then we had another one who was a graphics designer, which kind of did the overall tying of the product together and like all the symbology and stuff like that came together. Who then came in at the end and was like, okay, I see what's here. How do we tie this all together? All right. So it's been a really interesting process to see each person's different things. Like, for example, the background artist, I struggle to communicate with a lot. Her main language is German. And while the English is still pretty good, a lot of the times I will have to draw something for her to understand what I'm talking about. So everything needs a reference image, and I've gotten really in the habit of just being, okay, no, actually, this tiny thing that I want you to fix, I'm going to redraw everything so that this thing is exaggerated and you understand. Whereas with you, I was able to be like, maybe this character or this vibe is what I'm looking for, or this is how they kind of fit in the relationship dynamics. I know with Townsend, for example, I was like, yeah, he's supposed to be the guy that you go, that's the murderer, obviously. It's Satan, he's the devil, it's death or whatever, that's obviously the guy. And while he's shady, maybe he is not actually the culprit at the end of the day.
Because I'm pretty sure if I understood the structure of the game correctly, it could be anyone.
It could be anyone. So, anyone can be the victim or the murderer.
He's kind of a red herring, but he is also, it's possible for him to actually be the murderer. So it keeps you on your toes, Going back to Lady Townsend, I think that she was an interesting one because I'm sorry, Lady
Tealwoods.
Tealwood.
Yeah.
Um, she she was interesting because she she's very powerful, and I liked that. I like usually you get like either a damsel in distress or an evil slash seductive character, and those are usually the two roles that women fill in my
Mm.
illustration jobs, because that's the direction that is given to me. It's just those are the common tropes. If there's a woman, she's either a damsel in distress or some evil slash sexy character, or just a sexy character,
Yeah.
sexy barmaid, sexy, assistant, sexy whatever. And it gets tired, and I think that one of the interesting things about this character specifically was that she has a strength,
Mm.
without going to a point that some characters go to, which is like, this looks like a feminine face on a masculine body, which is something that, I get that some projects are trying to subvert tropes by saying like, look, I have a strong female,
Mm.
but you have to do that in a certain respectful way. Otherwise, you're just slapping a head on a body,
Because
and
it
you're
has to
not
feel like a real person, right?
exactly, yeah,
Mm.
exactly. And it's like you're really not doing any service. You're really not being progressive and challenging tropes if what you're doing is like a slapdash cut and paste
Yeah.
type of a character, And so I liked this character because I felt like um, she's strong because she has to be,
Mm.
and because that is the shape that her life has given her. And you mentioned like a military background,
Yeah.
and I thought, okay, that makes sense. This is a woman who um, had some kind of a service record, and during that service record, she said, "I want to be the best, soldier or whatever I can be. So I'm going to be strong, so I can do my job, so that people can depend on me." And
Mm.
she's the kind of lady, she looks like if she needed to throw you on her soldier or shoulder and march out of there, she could.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it's
Absolutely.
but then she's not walking around, with like guns blazing, because
Yeah.
then that's silly. She
Yeah.
has a nice suit on because
That's
she
it.
is controlled and classy and reserved, but also you have a sternness and a strength to like her gaze and her frame that lets you know that like this lady is very in control of
Mm.
herself, of her world, of her manner, of everything. And then just to kind of throw extra frosting on top of the cake, you have her starting to draw a sword. And so it clues you in also to like, this character probably exists in a time when swords were more acceptable.
Mm.
So automatically it puts you mentally in a certain frame, but also it lets you know that like this lady, I don't want to mess with her, and it's a similar vibe to Barrow. Like you don't really want to mess with Barrow Townsend, not in the same way for the same reasons.
Mm.
But the point is that she still can communicate that, and I think that was an important part of her character.
Because the other thing that's interesting is that you have to consider that every single one of these characters has to have motive for murder. All right.
Yeah.
And so you look at Barrow Townsend and you're like, oh yeah, he'd kill someone. It doesn't matter.
Yeah.
He could just be a psychopath. It doesn't matter, right? With Lady Tealwoods, you go, if she murdered someone, they earned it. And then the investigator is like, well, I still have to find out who the murderer is and like stop everyone else from being murdered because that's kind of my job. But then you as the player experiencing this in the story, you're like, oh yeah, they earned it.
Yeah. It's interesting because we had to kind of give every character like the classic means, motive, and opportunity. So you communicate that in different ways, and not every character is going to exude this kind of malice or strength. Some of them do the opposite. Some of them actually, their whole gig is that they seem a little too weak to be the murderer, but then it's like the story around them actually suggests, whether it was where they were found or who they were found with or whatever, it suggests, oh, maybe it's the person I least suspect, and so different characters need to work in different ways, and they're all fun, and they all have a place in the story, and it's something you have to figure out as an artist.
So while we're on that, a good contrast to Lady Tealwoods is Lana Roberts. She
Yeah.
is the youngest character in the cast. The kind of
Mhm.
story and the way that she's introduced is that her father, who is this really, really rich tycoon of a character, was invited to the banquet but didn't show up. And his daughter
Mhm.
finds the invitation and goes, "This is an opportunity for me," and she goes to it instead. And now she's this big anti-war protester type. But the outfit that she wears doesn't necessarily communicate that because she's trying to fit in with the banquet. She's trying to fit in with
Mhm.
these types that you know are military. So she's also wearing the tie, and she kind of has this futuristic, the Sky Captain, World of Tomorrow kind of a vibe
Yeah.
to it, right?
Yeah.
Which
Yeah.
leans more into the Art Deco, but also leans more towards the maybe this isn't set in the past; it is actually set in the future. Which in itself, the final product, you look at that and you go, okay, these things will make sense. When someone says that to you and you're reading this on a page with no picture and you're going, how am I going to put those things together? So I
Yeah.
thought that
Yeah.
that would be an interesting one for you to give us a bit of an insight into.
Yeah, she was a really interesting one. The project in general does an interesting thing, which is it kind of hints at a time period, but also hints that it's out of that time period, like outside of it. It's almost a it's almost an alternate reality
Mm.
because you have things that could exist side by side that don't necessarily go together, and so that's part of the challenge from an art point of view is to make them seem cohesive enough so that it doesn't stick out and you're like, wait, why is that in here? And I think she's an interesting example of that because she does have a little bit of an Art Deco vibe, a little bit of a um, Sky Captain vibe, like you were saying.
Mm.
I love that movie. I need to go rewatch it. Uh, and she has, I remember a lot of the references that I gathered were like the video game Dishonored,
Okay.
because I think that they do a similar and interesting thing, which is they're referring to a time period that we're familiar with, which is like Art Deco ish,
Yeah.
but that game definitely
Yeah.
is an alternate reality. So you have Art Deco, which we know, like we're kind of like, okay, 1930s ish, whatever, whatever. Maybe I'll see a flapper running around, in 1920s. But then you're like, oh, I have a cyber eyeball or something. I don't know. You like,
Yeah.
so they took these things and mashed them together, and it doesn't feel out of place. So I kind of thought that that was an interesting starting point to approach this character because she needed to kind of hint at that otherness, but still fit with the overall
Yeah.
believability of the project.
Because what I
As
wanted
a
for her
game.
was for her to feel so much more than her age being the
Yeah,
youngest person there. And I think that the
yeah,
outfit alone communicates a lot of that. But then her hairstyle, which is the two colors, it has the kind of the blue fringe, does
yeah.
give her that youthful punk kind of a vibe, which matches with her
Mm-hmm,
personality a lot, right?
mm-hmm.
But also sticks with the she is the blue character from that kind of Cluedo
Yeah,
brief that we
yeah,
started off with.
yeah,
And putting all those things together, like you can see a lot of these ideas together all in one place. None of it feels out of place. You don't look at it and you go, why did they do like it feels like that's who she is. This is a person,
yeah,
right? Which again, like right back from the start of this conversation, each of these characters has ended up feeling like their own person,
yeah.
which I think is really impressive.
It's thank you. I mean, it's honestly that's the goal. That's the goal every time. And sometimes you hit it, and sometimes you don't. But that's the goal: is you want them to feel like a. Um, you don't want them to feel two dimensional.
Yeah.
That's the bane of art making. You don't want it to feel like flat, like cardboard. So you really do a lot of thoughtful design, and you just spend a lot of time thinking about these characters to think like, I'm going to consider their entire life history and then decide as an artist which elements are going to kind of rise to the surface and be presented in this one image. And so, like, she has all of those things that you were talking about. She has like a blue streak in her hair, and it kind of suggests punk. It definitely suggests youth. It definitely suggests maybe I don't play inside the rules. But then she has this outfit that is a little bit militaristic. And so she definitely has like, oh, she comes from some kind of an orderly background. But then she has this like slightly Art Deco feel. So you're like, there's almost not an aristocratic vibe, but definitely she's not slumming it on the
I
streets,
was about to say rich daddy before we even got to that part, right?
Yeah, exactly. You get she comes from money,
Mm,
but she rejects it a little bit because she has that punk vibe, but also she like is going along with it because she's at this party.
yeah.
So you have to kind of people don't realize it, but when you're making an image, like those are the kind of really big and nebulous thoughts that you're trying to condense down into one readable, understandable image, even if the viewer is not going to understand it all right off the bat. And in fact, they shouldn't. It should
Mm.
reveal them. It should reveal itself to them over time.
Well, that's it.
And
Once you get context from either playing the game, reading about the story, and learning more about the characters, when you come back and look at these pieces, suddenly these individual parts make more sense to you. I feel like this is exceptionally in Barrett Townsend's case. You see Barrett Townsend, you go, okay, he's menacing, he's the pale, he's the death archetype or whatever, right? And then when you see him interacting with the other characters, you realize how his personality is conveyed in that. But then when you hear more about his history and his work life, where he is actually a jeweler and he's wearing the pieces because he's trying to show them off to people as like, these are the kind of things that I work with. This is how you could look. And he's trying to sell the appearance and that kind of opulence in itself. But also he's like super bargaining about everything and super haggling about everything, even human life, gives you this different depth to the character that's still there in the picture. Like that added context makes him more menacing when you understand why he has these things.
Yep. It's the situation where after spending a while with this character in this game, you'll look at an image that you've seen already 20 times and you'll go, oh, that's why, or oh, that makes more sense now. And that's the joy of good picture making, is that you can tell those kind of stories.
And then our last character. Now this is a funny, interesting difference from all the other ones we did, and I wanted to bring this one up in particular because I knew it was going to be a challenge for you. Now, this is Senator Lytton. This is a character based on my likeness. Now, because I knew in advance, one, I have the pink suit. And that means I can dress up as this character if this character looks like me and is the world's most convincing cosplay, because it literally is me, right? But then the other thing is that the character and the character design isn't my personality. So it has to be a picture of me acting as a character, essentially, right? So the Senator Lytton character is almost the corrupt senator kind of a thing, but like maybe like 50% corrupt, right? Because you have Judge Ward, who is like all the way gone. He's like, I really only care about my own self-interests. Whereas like Senator Lytton is like kind of the way there. He understands that he has to appease the people in order to stay in his position, whereas the judge doesn't have that problem. And so he has this charismatic slick about him where you kind of understand that he's self-interested, but he acts like he's trying to help everyone else, which is a good fit for a murderer, right? But then you have to put that charisma into the picture. And when I show you the reference picture alongside the final, in the reference picture, I look like a sad clown. And the final picture that we get, he is actually really inviting and charismatic. So I think it would be interesting to talk about that challenge there for you.
Yeah, you should definitely put them both next to each other. And in fact, the sketch even has a different vibe than the final. And I think that's another really interesting example to look at, because even just going from the sketch, which is pretty much like what you wanted, but then the final after that, you can see how even just small tweaks can change an image so that it is more true to what the character should be.
Because the sketch is more pensive almost, whereas the final is more inviting, I find.
Yes, and that's exactly what I was going for, because the way I see his character is that he's kind of a salesman, kind of a charmer, and if I was at a party, this guy would probably be one of the easiest people to talk to, because of him, because of the way he handles himself in the conversation. He's not any more trustworthy necessarily, but he definitely would be the guy that, I could talk to, as opposed to like, oh, that guy looks like death and that girl has a sword and she wants to kill me.
She's grumpy, and this guy has a big smile.
And he's already shaking my hand, you know, and
Yeah.
he's saying like, oh, I'm so glad you were able to make it, you know, like that's the inviting kind of a personality that he should have, with also behind that just a little bit of a hint of that, like, I'm in it for myself, and
Yeah.
you really shouldn't trust me, you know. So
Yeah.
all of that went into the stew of making this character. And if you're able to put the reference photo, the sketch, and then the final on screen
Yeah,
next to each
cool.
other, I think that the viewers will be able to see how, you kind of started with that, but then through the iterations you see it coming, kind of crystallizing and becoming more potent.
Because the reference picture really only gives you a haircut and an outfit. Really, when you're comparing the two side by side, right? That's what you ended with, right? And then you've injected so much personality into these clothes that you do actually, and same again as before, it feels like an actor is this disembodied concept now. Which I think is one of the cool things about being able to do that character design. Even just a quick sentence or a quick idea behind the concept that is something beyond a stereotype, whereas a stereotype would be like, this is the damsel in distress. You're like, okay, how does the damsel in distress occupy a role in a murder mystery story where any person could particularly be the murderer? That doesn't really work. So everyone has to be both possibly good or evil, essentially, right? And so then knowing from the start you have to have this moral ambiguity or this possibly sinister, right? Like, for example, in Lana Roberts' case, she's the youngest one. She could be potentially naive. She's a little bit of a punk. But like, do you really think that the rebel is capable of murder? And then you go, okay, well, actually, they have this huge political ideology clash where she's super anti-war, and a lot of people at this party are like weapons manufacturers, warmongers, ex-servicemen, army generals. And she's like, she's actually exactly where she wants to be right now. And seeing how the whole cast comes together and seeing how all these different things come together to add context does actually make it feel like a group of people that you could have seen in a movie, that you could have seen played in Clue, or you could have, you know what I mean? And I think that...
or Agatha Christie or something.
Exactly.
And that's what makes stories like hers work, is that the characters are not flat. They have their surface life, they have their surface presentation, their mask, but every character also has their hidden self. And that, just even that acknowledgement that every person has a mask and an interior already by itself implies that there's things about them you don't know, they're capable of things that they maybe don't seem to at first, you know, and boom, instantly you kind of have created a viable suspect for a mystery, you know, and you started with the components you need for an interesting character arc, you know.
Yeah, and I really like how it's all tied together, because that's the other impressive thing, right? You've been tasked with creating 13 characters, right? And each of them has a different primary color palette, because you're trying to match that Cluedo ideology of the Professor Plum, or, you know, how each character is easily identifiable on the board or in your hand or whatever by a specific color, rather than having to read the name or memorize it every single time. It gives it that kind of language independence or whatever, right? But you as an artist, you're like, oh, I don't just get to have a palette where everyone is, like, you understand that everyone's from the same nation, or you understand that everyone is in the same army group or whatever. So you have this huge range of colors. You have this huge diverse range of characters. Each has different personalities, different, like the way they carry themselves. The posing is all different. All these kind of things, and yet you have to somehow, through your art, convince the viewer, the player, that these people all belong in the same game, on the same screen, in the same, you know,
in the same world.
Yeah, which I think is really interesting, and I think it's been done really, really well. I've been like really impressed with how the art for this game has turned out over the whole, because not only has what you've done on its own together created its like perfect little character story, right? That these things have together. And then you add stuff like the background art comes together and you go, oh, okay, now that I have the setting, I do understand just how Art Deco it is. I get the feeling of the great big mansion and you understand the circumstances of why these characters are here and stuff like that as well. Like one of my favorite tidbits is one of the rooms in the mansion is a pond, like a fish pond inside the mansion. And Lady Tealwoods' big deal is that she's like, I got this whole big mansion because of being a servicewoman, earned me all this money because I got all these medals and blah, 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 whatever. And I bought the mansion because that was the thing to do, and I hate it. Except the pond. The pond is the one thing I like about the entire mansion, which I think is really funny. Because after being in the war for so long, she's like, look, I just want this one peaceful thing in my life. And that's communicated through her just being grumpy all the time. And she's like ready to start a fight with anyone, like all these kind of things. And you're seeing how all these things slowly start tying together, the story pulling all these different pieces together. And then, and then someone is murdered, and then you, the player, is like, okay, I'm now picking this apart. I get to look at these individual details and see where these things overlap, see why these characters chose to do these things, or see, like, they really get to look through the ladder of the process of how we put everything together. Because those things might be important in a murder mystery. Like you don't know what's this thing is the MacGuffin, this is the red herring, this is the murder weapon or whatever.
You kind of don't know what's important and what's not, and you're trying to sort through this pile of information, including the characters themselves and like what are they telling you and what are they not telling you.
Yeah. So I guess that's kind of what we wanted to do today, is do like a quick talk about, first of all, character design in the game, and not just like as a, hey, the game is really cool, check out the game, but I think there is an important conversation in working with artists and talking about the art director versus the artisting itself, because I know there's a lot of other game designers that will find this kind of a conversation super helpful. But also the process I think is really interesting and is rewarding in itself. But also to take a moment to have a look at this cool thing that we have built, because I am actually really proud of this project and how it's come along. Very soon I'll have a physical version to be able to show how it all actually sits together, and we can show that off. But yeah, it's actually been pretty cool to come back to, because it's been a while. It's been several months since we finished actually working on these pieces. So it has been pretty cool to come back and go through some of that stuff, and you can still feel how fresh it is for us having done it now, and like how strong the initial concept, the initial feeling that got us to this point is, which that in itself is impressive, I think.
Yeah, it was a fun project, and I really like the way it turned out so far. And it's always fun to talk about the design process. There's a lot that goes into it that people don't realize, and a lot of it is trying to think about like these big nebulous topics and condense them down into a way that the viewer will just kind of digest without even realizing that they're doing it. And then that will, if done right, it will improve and inform your game experience, whether it's role-playing games, which is where I come from, or board games, mobile games, or even like movies, or it doesn't really matter. It's all the same thing, in that you're trying to communicate something to the viewer in the best way possible, and in this case it's these possible murder suspects, and so whether it's that or something else, like the whole point of design and character design is I'm trying to take a big concept and reduce it down so that people just kind of understanding it they understand it without even realizing they are understanding it.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Once they've been pitched that initial bit of information, it's been digested, and then the story says, hey, here's this next thing, and they go, oh, I knew that already. I knew why that thing is important because I already knew about this particular thing from their character or whatever. And I think this does that very well.
Yeah. It turned out really well.
And that is also conveniently kind of our time here. So did you want to give everyone a quick where they can find you?
Sure. So like I said, I do most of my work in the RPG space. So there's quite a few projects that I've worked on in the last couple of years that are role-playing games. I also just, as of a few days ago, successfully completed my own Kickstarter campaign.
Nice.
To Yeah, thanks. To fund my own game that I designed. So if you go on Kickstarter and you type in TLD, you'll see an ugly little goblin guy. That's my game. That's my work. And I think if you do go look it up, and my website is billyblueart.com. Nice and simple. If you go check out my website, you'll actually see work that looks much different than the Tealwoods work. I'm really comfortable in a variety of styles. So sometimes it looks more kind of comic booky like this. Sometimes it looks like really kind of grungy and splattery, and sometimes it looks like nicely painted 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. You know, sometimes I mean I can even comfortably do like kids lit style, friendly looking, colorful things. So yeah, if you want to check out some work, check me out there. And if you want to check out my project, you know, always appreciate the support. So go on Kickstarter and check out TLD. And yeah.
And I'll put links for all those things in the description. So if you want to check out some of these things, have a look down there. And on this channel, I do have a lot of other game design kind of devlog kind of things, similar things to this. That's worth checking out, and you should click on some of these buttons that I'll have on the screen so that you can go and have a look at those. Have a look at those other things, or hit the subscribe button. Just click on everything. Just let it loose. Just hit that middle mouse button on just everything on the screen. Honestly, just go to town.
And honestly, like for people like you and I, even a like and a subscribe is hugely helpful.
Yeah.
A lot of people, they don't realize it, but we make our livings, not just money wise, but like actually just being able to make the next video sometimes depends on just getting enough likes, getting enough subscribes, getting enough views. So yeah, please hit that like button. It's super helpful. It lets YouTube know, and it lets us know you like the content and you want to see more of it, you know? So nobody wants to be shouting down a well, you know?
That's true. You should do what he says. He knows things. I might know things, and you'll find out by watching more of these videos.
He did not bribe me very much to say that either.
No.
So, you know?
I didn't.
Yeah. No, but click the like button. It helps a lot. Oh, and before I forget, I'm officially challenging you to a game of Marble Snap later.
Oh, shit. All right. Let's jam. I'm keen.
Just be prepared. Be prepared to win.
Oh, okay.
So.
All right. We'll sort something out. Look for that video. That'll be coming soon too.
Yeah.